Welcome to True Crime Threads, where dark stories unfold. Today we uncover a deadly romance that ended in murder. In a quiet suburban town, Colton Hargrove lived a life that many would describe as ordinary. He worked as a garbage collector, starting his days before sunrise and finishing before most people had their morning coffee. Despite the mundane routine, Colton took pride in his job, believing that even the simplest work held value. His rugged exterior and strong build made him a familiar yet distant figure in the community. Beneath his gruff demeanor, however, was a man who longed for connection, someone to share his modest world with. Colton's life changed one frosty winter morning when he walked into a local diner for a cup of coffee to warm his hands after hours on his garbage route. Behind the counter stood Leona Darnell, a waitress with an enigmatic presence. She had sharp eyes that seemed to carry untold stories, and a quick wit that made her a favorite among the regulars. Leona was no stranger to hard work or difficult circumstances. Her past wasn't something she talked about, but the hardened edge to her personality suggested she'd seen her fair share of struggles. Colton was immediately drawn to her. She was different from anyone he had ever known, strong-willed, confident, and unapologetically herself. Their connection was instant, though unspoken at first. Day after day, Colton returned to the diner, finding excuses to linger a little longer each time. Eventually, their casual exchanges turned into conversations, and conversations became late-night talks over shared meals. Within months, the two were inseparable. Leona moved into Colton's small house on the edge of town, a modest but cozy place surrounded by trees. It was far from extravagant, but for them it felt like a fresh start. They built a routine together, finding joy in the little things: a quiet evening on the porch, simple home-cooked dinners, and laughter over shared memories. For a while it seemed like they had found the happiness both had been searching for. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Leona's independent nature clashed with Colton's deep need for reassurance. He adored her, but his insecurities often got the better of him. Small disagreements over trivial matters turned into heated arguments, leaving both feeling misunderstood. Leona's secretive habits only deepened the divide. She would leave the house without explanation, returning late with vague excuses. When Colton pressed her for answers, she deflected, leaving him even more frustrated. The rumors that began circulating about Leona didn't help matters. Neighbors whispered about her past, speculating about the men she had been seen with before meeting Colton. While he tried to dismiss the gossip, doubt started to creep in. He couldn't shake the feeling that Leona was hiding something, and that their love, once so promising, might not be as solid as he had believed. Colton's life began to unravel as his growing suspicions about Leona consumed him. What had once been a passionate romance now felt like a fragile, crumbling illusion. He couldn't pinpoint when the unease started, but over time the small inconsistencies in Leona's behavior became impossible to ignore. She often left their home without explanation, offering only vague excuses about errands or meeting old friends. Colton tried to brush it off, convincing himself that he was overthinking, but the pit in his stomach told a different story. Late one evening, Colton discovered something that shattered the fragile trust he clung to. While cleaning up after dinner, he noticed an envelope stuffed into the back of Leona's dresser drawer. Inside were wads of cash and a set of photos. The money was one thing. Colton didn't recall Leona mentioning any windfall, but the photos told a story he hadn't prepared for. They showed Leona laughing and leaning close to another man, a tall, polished figure in an expensive suit. Colton stared at the images, the man's face etched into his mind. The name scribbled on the back of one photo confirmed his identity: Derek Waverly. Derek wasn't just any man. He was a prominent lawyer in town, known for his charm and influence. Seeing Leona with someone so vastly different from himself made Colton's insecurities roar to life. Questions swirled in his mind. Was she cheating? Had she grown tired of his simple life? He couldn't imagine what a man like Derek could want with Leona, but the photos didn't lie. Consumed by jealousy, Colton's thoughts turned darker with each passing day. He began following Leona when she left the house, trailing her discreetly in his truck. She visited places he didn't recognize and spent hours in parts of town far removed from their quiet suburb. She seemed to be avoiding him more, spending less time at home and brushing off his concerns whenever he tried to talk to her. When Colton wasn't following Leona, he turned his focus to Derek. He staked out the lawyer's home and office, watching from a distance and taking notes on his routines. Derek lived a life of luxury, one that stood in stark contrast to Colton's world of early mornings and blue-collar work. Every interaction Derek had, every jog through the park, every late-night meeting, Colton tracked it all, his obsession growing with each detail. Leona's dismissive attitude only fueled his suspicions. She seemed to drift further from him, leaving him isolated in his own thoughts. For Colton, the betrayal felt undeniable, and the man he had once been, a quiet, hard-working individual, was slowly being overtaken by paranoia and anger. He didn't know where his obsession would lead, but he could feel himself slipping, caught in a web of distrust and resentment. Colton's mind was a storm of anger and confusion, each passing day amplifying the betrayal he believed he had suffered. The image of Derek Waverly with Leona haunted him, replaying over and over as he sought clarity but found none. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that Derek was the root of his misery. In Colton's eyes, Derek wasn't just stealing Leona, he was destroying the life they had built together. The frustration boiled inside him, eating away at the remnants of his rational mind. He stopped thinking of Derek as just a man and began to see him as a symbol of everything he could never be: wealthy, sophisticated, and confident. These feelings intensified when Colton discovered that Derek's name was attached to multiple high-profile clients in town. It seemed like everyone respected him, and the thought only fueled Colton's resentment. How could he, a garbage man, compete with someone like that? On a particularly cold and stormy evening, Colton's obsession reached its breaking point. He parked his truck down the street from Derek's upscale neighborhood, his hands gripping the steering wheel as rain lashed against the windshield. For weeks he had watched Derek's routines, and he knew this was the night the lawyer would be out jogging in the park nearby. With a pounding heart, Colton grabbed a metal pipe he had taken from his truck bed earlier. He didn't fully understand what he planned to do, but the weight of the pipe in his hands felt strangely comforting. The park was eerily quiet, the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement the only noise. Colton waited near the trail Derek always used, his breath visible in the cold night air. When Derek finally appeared, jogging under the dim glow of the streetlights, Colton felt his pulse quicken. Without thinking, he stepped out from the shadows and blocked Derek's path. The confrontation was brief but explosive. Colton shouted accusations, his voice rising above the rain. Derek, taken off guard, tried to de-escalate, but Colton was beyond reasoning. The rage that had simmered for weeks erupted, and before Derek could react, Colton swung the pipe. The impact was immediate and brutal. Derek collapsed to the ground, his lifeless form sprawled across the wet pavement. Realizing what he had done, Colton panicked. His hands shook as he dropped the pipe and stumbled back toward his truck. His mind raced with fear and regret, but he didn't dare look back at the body. Within minutes, he was speeding away from the scene, his tires splashing through puddles as he disappeared into the night. Back at home, Colton sat in silence, his clothes soaked and his heart pounding. He had crossed a line he could never undo, but in that moment he wasn't thinking about the consequences. All he could feel was the cold weight of guilt settling over him like the storm outside. As the days passed, Colton wrestled with the enormity of what he had done. He avoided the news, dreading any mention of Derek's name or the discovery of his body. Each morning, as he returned to his garbage route, he would glance over his shoulder, half expecting police cars to appear and take him away. But as the weeks turned into months and Derek's disappearance remained unsolved, Colton began to convince himself that he might have gotten away with murder. Despite his attempts to maintain normalcy, Colton's relationship with Leona deteriorated even further. She had grown more distant than ever, barely acknowledging him when she was home and spending more time away. Colton, plagued by guilt and paranoia, felt himself spiraling. He began to question everything about their relationship, wondering if Leona had even loved him or if he had simply been a convenient pawn in her life. One evening, while searching for answers, Colton stumbled upon something that reignited his suspicions. In Leona's closet, tucked beneath a pile of old clothes, he found a key to a storage unit. The discovery sent a jolt through him. Leona had never mentioned renting a storage unit, and the secrecy surrounding it raised more questions than answers. Without hesitation, Colton pocketed the key and decided to investigate. The following day, he drove across town to the address stamped on the key tag. The storage facility was nondescript, nestled behind a strip of rundown businesses. Colton approached the unit with a pounding heart, unlocking the door and sliding it open. Inside, he found a shocking collection of items that painted a very different picture of Leona. Stacks of cash were neatly bundled in boxes, alongside fake IDs and documents with various aliases. But it was the photographs and letters that caught Colton's attention. They detailed a series of elaborate scams and blackmail schemes that Leona had orchestrated. Among them were documents linking her directly to Derek Waverly, not as a romantic partner but as an accomplice. The papers revealed that Derek had been working with Leona to con wealthy clients, using his legal expertise to cover their tracks. Colton's hands trembled as he pieced everything together. Leona had been playing a dangerous game, and when her relationship with Derek soured, she had used Colton's insecurities to her advantage. The photos he had found in her drawer hadn't been proof of an affair, they had been bait. Leona had planted them, knowing they would push Colton into a jealous rage. The realization hit Colton like a punch to the gut. Derek's death hadn't been an accident born of his own suspicions, it had been a calculated move orchestrated by Leona. She had manipulated him into doing her dirty work, eliminating Derek when their partnership became inconvenient. Betrayal and rage surged through Colton as he stared at the evidence, his love for Leona now fully twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. Colton drove home from the storage unit, his mind racing with a mix of fury and devastation. The woman he had loved, the woman he had risked everything for, had used him in the cruelest way imaginable. The realization shattered him. He couldn't stop thinking about how Leona had manipulated his every move, turning his insecurities into a weapon. Derek's death wasn't the result of his suspicions, it was the endgame of her elaborate scheme. When Colton arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. Leona's car was in the driveway, but she hadn't bothered to greet him. He found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unbothered by his presence. Her calm indifference sent a wave of rage through him, but he forced himself to stay composed. He needed answers, and for the first time he wasn't going to let her deflections stop him. Colton confronted her, demanding the truth. His accusations were sharp, his words dripping with anger and betrayal. At first, Leona denied everything, attempting to play the part of the innocent victim. But as Colton revealed what he had found in the storage unit, the documents, the cash, and the photos, her mask began to slip. Realizing there was no use in lying, she finally dropped her facade. With a chilling lack of remorse, Leona admitted to everything. She had partnered with Derek to run scams on wealthy clients, using his position as a lawyer to help extort and manipulate their targets. When Derek started to pull away, worried about the risks, Leona had needed a way to cut him out of the picture. That was when she turned to Colton. She had carefully planted the photos, knowing they would ignite his jealousy. She had counted on his emotions to do the rest. As Leona spoke, her tone was cold and calculating, as though she were discussing a business transaction rather than a deadly betrayal. Colton listened in stunned silence, his heart breaking with each word. The woman he had loved so deeply saw him as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. Something inside Colton snapped. All the rage, guilt, and heartbreak he had been carrying erupted in an uncontrollable wave. In a blind fury, he lunged at Leona. The struggle was brief but violent, and when it was over, she lay motionless on the floor. The weight of what he had done hit him immediately, But this time there was no panic, only a hollow emptiness. Colton fled the house, knowing there was no escape from what he had done. The police discovered Leona's body the next morning, and it didn't take long for them to trace the crime back to Colton. During his arrest and subsequent trial, the full story unraveled, shocking the community. The courtroom was filled with whispers as the details of Leona's schemes and manipulation came to light. Colton was sentenced to life in prison, but no punishment could match the torment he carried. He had loved Leona with everything he had, only to discover she had orchestrated his downfall. The weight of that betrayal was something he would bear forever, a haunting reminder of how far love and deception could intertwine.